Welcome back to Steel and Fire, where we don't just recount history, we relive the moments that shaped our world. In our previous episode, we stood upon the dusty plains of Zama, witnessing the tragic finale of a decades-long struggle between two military titans, Hannibal Barca and Scipio Africanus. Zama was the end of an era, but it was not where the story began. To understand why Zama became a turning point, we must travel backward through time. Back more than a decade. Back to the moment when Rome stood on the brink of annihilation. Back to the battlefield that sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The Battle of Cannae. A place where Hannibal did not simply win, he achieved perfection. Where a smaller army encircled and destroyed nearly the entire Roman force. Where, in a single day, so many Romans fell that the Senate forbade public mourning because there were not enough people left to grieve. Today, Steel and Fire takes you back to that windswept plain. To the dust, the heat, and the dread. To the moment Hannibal Barca carved his name into eternity with the greatest tactical masterpiece ever executed. Join us as we turn back the clock and return to Cannae. After Zama, we witness the tragic end of an era. But to understand why Zama became the final chapter, we must travel backward through time. Back to the moment when Rome stood on the edge of annihilation. Back to 218 BC. Back to the moment when the name Hannibal Barca first became the nightmare of a civilization. Hannibal, the man who brought war across the impossible. Carthage, the great North African empire, ruled lands that today span Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and reached far into Spain. But the rise of Rome set the stage for an inevitable clash, the Second Punic War. And at the center of that storm stood Hannibal. He convinced the Carthaginian Senate to approve a campaign no one had ever dared attempt. To lead nearly 100,000 soldiers across Spain, across modern-day France, and over the snow-covered Alps to strike at the heart of Italy. This was not a march. It was a declaration of defiance. But the cost was brutal. By the time Hannibal reached the Alps, he had only 50,000 men left. By the time he crossed them, through freezing winds, avalanches, and hostile tribes, he emerged with just 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Any other commander would have turned back. Hannibal did not. He descended into the Po Valley, gained the support of the Gauls, and immediately crushed the Roman forces sent to stop him. Rome began to tremble. Hannibal's reputation spread like wildfire. The city fell into panic. The Senate fractured. And in the eyes of the Romans, Hannibal was no longer a general, he was the shadow of destruction. Rome in despair, Hannibal could not be stopped. For the next 2 years, Hannibal rampaged across Italy. He won at Trebia. He won at Trasimene. Everywhere he went, Rome bled. Rome could not predict him, could not catch him, could not defeat him. But Hannibal also could not end the war. He had no secure base, no steady reinforcements, no guarantee the Gauls would remain loyal. And Carthage was too distracted by wars in Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia to send help. So Hannibal chose a strategy as cold as it was brilliant. Inflict maximum damage on Rome while avoiding any battle that could destroy his army. He did not need to capture Rome. He only needed Rome to collapse under its own fear. 216 BC. Rome bets everything. Hannibal marched into Apulia, southern Italy, and set camp near the town of Cannae, a strategic position controlling the route to Rome's vital grain supply. Rome understood the danger. If Hannibal seized this region, they would starve before they fell by the sword. So they gathered one of the largest armies Rome had ever fielded. 40,000 Roman legionaries. 40,000 allied Italian troops. 80,000 soldiers in total, nearly twice Hannibal's numbers. 2 consuls, Varro and Paulus, alternated command each day. And on August 2nd, 216 BC, Varro, bold, impatient, and eager for glory, held command. He deployed the Roman army across a front nearly 1.6 kilometers wide, packing the infantry into a massive block 50 to 70 ranks deep, a living battering ram meant to crush Hannibal through sheer weight. Rome believed they would overwhelm Hannibal with numbers. They did not know that this formation would become their tomb. The road to Cannae was paved with fear, but the battlefield itself. That was where Hannibal revealed the full brilliance of his mind. A plain of dust and death. Cannae was not a grand city. Just a small settlement perched on a low hill in Apulia. Quiet, unremarkable, almost forgotten. But the land around it was something else entirely. A vast open plain. Flat as a blade. Dry as bone. And swept by fierce summer winds that hurled dust into the air like a desert storm. To most commanders, this was a terrible place to fight. No cover. No high ground. No natural defenses. But to Hannibal Barca, it was perfect. Because this battlefield offered two things he needed. Space, enough for his cavalry to dominate. Wind and dust, enough to blind and choke the tightly packed Roman infantry. And on one side, the Aufidus River flowed quietly, a natural barrier that would trap the Romans if they tried to retreat. Hannibal did not stumble upon Cannae. He chose it. He chose it the way a hunter chooses the place where the prey will fall. Rome walks into the trap. When the Roman army arrived in early August, they saw exactly what Hannibal wanted them to see. A wide, open field where their massive infantry block could finally crush him. Varro, bold, reckless, hungry for glory, believed this was Rome's moment. He saw a battlefield. Hannibal saw a coffin. The wind turns against Rome. On the morning of August 2nd, the hot Apulian wind, the Vulturnus, blew straight into the faces of the Roman legions. Dust filled their eyes. Sand scraped their throats. The sun hammered down on their heavy armor. Behind them was the river. Before them was Hannibal. And between them was a plain that would soon drink more blood than any battlefield in Roman history. Hannibal's silent advantage. Rome believed they had chosen the ground. But every detail favored Hannibal. The wind. The dust. The open space. The river blocking retreat. The narrow valley forcing Rome to pack its infantry even tighter. Even the heat worked against them. Their armor turned the battlefield into an oven. Hannibal's troops, lighter and more mobile, were fighting on a field designed for them. Rome was fighting on a field designed to destroy them. The calm before the storm. As dawn broke, the two armies faced each other across the dusty plain. The Romans stood in a massive block, 80,000 men shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, ranks packed so tightly they could barely move. Hannibal's smaller, more flexible army stretched across the field in a long, outward curving line like a bow. The wind howled. Dust swirled. The sun rose. And the stage was set. Cannae was no longer just a battlefield. It was a trap, a masterpiece of terrain, timing, and psychology. A place where one man's genius would rewrite the art of war forever. Next, let's talk about the Hannibal's tactical masterpiece. On the dusty plain of Cannae, with the Vulturnus wind whipping into the faces of the Roman legions, Hannibal Barca began arranging one of the greatest battlefield formations ever conceived. Not through numbers. Not through superior weapons. But through pure genius. The center, the bow of death. Hannibal did not form a straight line like the Romans. He did the opposite. He placed his weaker troops, Gauls and Iberians, in the center. But instead of forming a flat line, they stood in a forward curving arc, like the belly of a drawn bow. It looked strange. It looked fragile. But it was deliberate. Hannibal wanted the Romans to hit the center. He wanted them to believe it was collapsing. He wanted them to push deeper and deeper. Because the deeper they pushed, the deeper they fell into his trap. The flanks, the blades of Libya. If the center was the bow, the flanks were the blades. On both sides, Hannibal placed his elite Libyan infantry, hardened veterans who had fought Rome for years and knew every rhythm of Roman combat. They stood slightly back, forming the sides of a massive funnel. As the center gradually fell back, by design, the Libyans would swing inward, closing like the jaws of a trap. The cavalry, the decisive weapon. If the infantry was the trap, the cavalry was the killing blow. Hannibal had 10,000 cavalry, fewer than Rome's infantry, but vastly superior in quality. Left flank, Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry, powerful, aggressive, fearless. Right flank, Numidian light cavalry, fast as the wind, unpredictable as desert ghosts. Rome had only 6,000 cavalry, most of them Italian allies, no match for Hannibal's riders. Hannibal knew that if his cavalry won, the battle was his. And he prepared everything for that moment. Where did Hannibal stand? Not behind the lines. Not on a hill. Hannibal stood in the center, at the most dangerous point, where the curved line would take the heaviest pressure. He stood there because he needed to control the timing of the retreat with his own eyes and his own voice. A normal commander gives orders from afar. A genius stands where history will turn. What did Rome see? They saw a thin, weak center. A strange curved formation. An enemy outnumbered. A chance to crush Hannibal once and for all. They believed victory was within reach. They did not realize they were staring at a masterpiece of battlefield design, a trap so perfect that history would remember it by one name. The double envelopment. A maneuver almost no one had achieved before. And one that few would ever achieve again. And the battle begins, when Rome believes it is winning. Morning, August 2nd, 216 BC. The Vulturnus wind lashes dust into the faces of the Roman legions. But they don't care. Because before them stands Hannibal, and they believe today is the day they end him. Rome strikes the center, exactly as Hannibal intended. When the horns sound, the massive Roman infantry block begins to move. 80,000 men, shoulder to shoulder, advancing like a living wall of iron. They don't charge. They don't sprint. They push, step by step, like a grinding machine of flesh and steel. And just as Hannibal predicted, they slam straight into his curved center. The Gauls and Iberians begin to fall back. Not because they are weak, but because they are meant to fall back. Rome doesn't know that. They see the enemy retreating. They hear Gauls screaming. They see the arc collapsing inward. And they believe they are winning. The Carthaginian center breaks, but breaks on Hannibal's terms. The outward curve begins to flatten, then bend inward, then form a deep U shape. But every step backward is controlled, measured, intentional. Hannibal stands in the center, directing the retreat with his own voice. He is not letting the line collapse. He is letting it pretend to collapse. Rome sees only victory. They push harder. They commit more men. They pour their entire strength into the center. Exactly as Hannibal wanted. The Libyan flanks begin to turn, unseen by Rome. As the center pulls back, the elite Libyan infantry on both flanks begin to pivot inward. Not fast. Not dramatic. But precise. Like gears in a machine. Rome does not see them. The dust hides them. The packed formation blocks their view. They do not know the jaws of the trap are closing. The more Rome advances, the deeper they fall into the trap. The Roman formation is too dense. They cannot turn. They cannot spread out. They cannot retreat. They can only move forward. And that is exactly what Hannibal wants. Because the deeper they push, the deeper they are swallowed by the funnel. The deeper they push, the more surrounded they become. The deeper they push, the more they lose their mobility. They think they are crushing the Carthaginian center. But in truth, they are locking themselves inside the most perfect trap ever devised on a battlefield. The decisive moment approaches. The center is at its breaking point, by design. The Libyan flanks are almost closed. Hannibal's cavalry is preparing the killing blow. Rome still sees nothing. They still believe they are winning. They do not know that in just a few minutes, there will be no escape. The double envelopment, the moment that defined history. On the plain of Cannae, dust still swirled in the Vulturnus wind. Metal clashed. Men screamed. The battlefield roared like the gates of hell had opened. And in that chaos, Hannibal unleashed the maneuver that would echo through history. Carthaginian cavalry crushes the Roman horse. On the left, Hannibal's Spanish and Gallic cavalry smashed into the Roman horsemen with overwhelming force. The Romans broke almost instantly. On the right, the Numidians, fast, elusive, unpredictable, harassed, stretched, and shattered Rome's allied cavalry. Within minutes, Rome had no cavalry left. And Hannibal gave the order. Do not pursue. Circle back. Strike the Roman rear. The Libyan flanks close in. While the cavalry wheeled around, the elite Libyan infantry on both flanks pivoted inward. They were no longer on the sides. They were now behind the Roman infantry. The Roman soldiers, packed tightly and pushing forward, had no idea. They saw only the enemy in front. They did not see the jaws closing around them. The trap snapped shut. And then, the Carthaginian cavalry arrived behind the Roman line. From the dust, from the rear, from the place Rome least expected, 10,000 horsemen sealed the circle. In an instant, the largest Roman army ever assembled became a trapped mass of humanity. Front, Carthaginian center. Sides, Libyan infantry. Rear, Carthaginian cavalry. No escape. No maneuvering. No hope. This was the double envelopment, the most perfect encirclement ever executed. Cannae becomes a slaughterhouse. Once the circle closed, the battlefield ceased to be a battle. It became a slaughterhouse. The Romans were packed so tightly that they could not swing their swords. They could not lift their shields. They could barely breathe. Those in front died first. Those behind were pushed forward to die next. Those in the middle were crushed under the weight of their own comrades. There was no formation. No command. Only panic and death. Ancient writers said the screams at Cannae sounded like tens of thousands of souls being dragged into the underworld at once. Rome collapses. By midday, the circle still held. By sunset, it had not opened. By the end of the day, 50,000 to 70,000 Romans lay dead. A loss so catastrophic that the Roman Senate forbade public mourning, because there were not enough people left to grieve. Among the dead, Consul Paulus, 80 senators and officers, thousands of Roman nobles. Only 14,500 men survived, most of them those who fled early. Cannae was not a defeat. It was the greatest disaster in Roman history. And it was the moment Hannibal reached the absolute peak of military genius. Cannae was over. But its shockwaves were only beginning. On that dusty plain, as the sun bled into the horizon, Rome did not just lose an army. It lost confidence, hope, and nearly its future. Rome descends into despair. News of the disaster reached Rome faster than any messenger. When the survivors limped back, the city fell into a silence so heavy that ancient writers said Rome had never been so quiet since its founding. The Senate panicked. Entire noble families were wiped out. Some households had no one left to light a lamp. And because so many had died, the Senate was forced to forbid public mourning, for fear the city would drown in grief. Hannibal could have marched on Rome. After Cannae, the road to Rome lay wide open. No major army stood in his way. No cavalry remained to oppose him. Nothing separated Hannibal from the heart of the Republic. Many of his commanders urged him to march on the city. Hannibal, the Numidian cavalry leader, famously said, "Hannibal, you know how to win a victory, but not how to use it." But Hannibal did not march. Why Hannibal did not attack Rome? Not because he feared Rome. Not because he lacked ambition. But because he had no siege equipment. He had no reinforcements. His army was exhausted after years of campaigning. Carthage refused to send more troops, being tied down in Spain and Sicily. Hannibal knew that if he reached Rome without the means to take it, he would be trapped and destroyed. So he chose a different strategy. Bleed Rome slowly, turn its allies against it, and let the Republic collapse from within. For years afterward, he roamed southern Italy, undefeated and untouchable. Rome does not die, Rome transforms. But Rome did not collapse. Instead, Rome did something few civilizations could do after a catastrophe like Cannae. It adapted. It raised new armies. It changed its strategy. It refused to fight Hannibal directly. It attacked Carthage's allies. It shifted the war to Spain and North Africa. And from the ashes of Cannae, a new leader emerged, Scipio Africanus. He would carry the war to Carthage. He would force Hannibal to return home. And he would face him at Zama, where our story began. Cannae, a battle that never fades. Cannae is not just a battle. It is a lesson in strategy, a warning against arrogance, a testament to Hannibal's genius, and the moment Rome nearly vanished. But from that disaster, Rome learned how to become an empire. Cannae was their greatest defeat, but also the reason they became unstoppable. You have just traveled with steel and fire through one of the bloodiest and most extraordinary chapters in human history. From the dust-choked winds of Cannae, to the clash of steel, to the moment an entire republic stood on the edge of extinction. We witnessed the brilliance of Hannibal, the pride of Rome, and the terrible cost of war. But history does not end at Cannae. It moves. It shifts. It tests those who dare to rise from the ashes. And from this disaster, Rome learned how to become an empire. Thank you for walking with us through the echoes of time. If you love epic stories, decisive battles, and the people who shaped our world, stay with Steel and Fire. Because history still has countless secrets waiting to be told. We'll see you in the next chapter of our journey.